My name is Reynold, and this is the night that completely changed the course of my life. It was a spring night in New York, but not one of those gentle, breezy, flower-scented nights. No, the city was shrouded in a thick veil of rain, as if the sky had decided to pour all its sadness onto the streets in one desperate gesture. The water came down hard, soaking the concrete and turning the usual glow of the city lights into blurry, flickering reflections. The buildings disappeared beneath low-lying clouds, and the steam rising from the warm ground mixed with the damp chill of the early morning. The lights of the Brooklyn Bridge danced like ghosts across the wet visor of my helmet. Each drop of rain that slid down my face was like a tiny blade of distraction, distorting the world in front of me as I sliced through the wind on my motorcycle. I was driving home after a day that seemed to have no end. The kind of day that drains your energy and makes you forget why you started it all. Work had been exhausting, not just physically, but mentally. The kind of exhaustion that makes the silence of the night feel welcoming. At that moment, the only relief was the sense of freedom that speed provided. The city, wet and shiny, seemed to want to embrace me and push me away at the same time. The bike roared beneath me, vibrating in a rhythm that pulsed in sync with my heart. It was as if I could, for a few moments, leave everything behind. The pressure, the deadlines, the problems that awaited me at home. With every turn, I believed I was in control, but it was only a fragile illusion. And that night, reality was about to remind me of it. The road was slippery. The lanes shone in the headlights, betrayingly, like wet glass. The wind blew hard, throwing drops against my body like icy needles. And then it happened. A car coming from nowhere abruptly invaded my lane. I barely had time to think. It was as if time went into slow motion. I saw the headlights, felt my body react. I pulled hard on the handlebars, trying to avoid the impact. I felt my heart rise to my throat, and a scream that had never been emitted was trapped there. But it was too late. The shock was brutal. All I remember was the sensation of being ripped from reality, of the ground disappearing beneath me, of the cold cutting into my skin as my body was thrown into the air like a lifeless doll. I felt the impact, like a dull explosion. The world spun. The sky and the ground switched places. The pain came like an avalanche, raw, deep, crushing. My bones snapped like dry twigs. My skin was torn apart by the asphalt. And then, nothingness. Darkness fell like a heavy curtain. When I opened my eyes, or whatever they were, I was no longer on the bridge. The cold, the fear, and the pain were completely gone. There was no noise from cars, sirens, or rain. There was only silence and light. An intense blue light surrounded me on all sides. It was like being in an ocean of energy and calm. But this light didn't hurt my eyes. On the contrary, it brought a feeling of comfort, as if every part of me was being embraced by something much bigger, wiser, more ancient. I was floating, or walking. It was hard to tell. I felt no weight, no body, but I was aware, more so than I had ever been in my life. Everything was strange and familiar at the same time. It was like waking from a dream within a dream, only this time, things finally made sense. The light pulsed, alive, as if it breathed with me. It was as if I were part of it, and it was part of me. For a moment I wondered, is this death? But there was no fear. There was nothing about the experience that suggested an end. It was more like a return, as if I had finally returned to a place I should never have left. Time seemed suspended, non-existent. There was no yesterday, no tomorrow. There was only now, and now was full. It was then that I heard a voice. "Zir, follow me." The voice didn't come from a specific place. It wasn't in front or behind. It came from within me, like a thought that wasn't my own. It was comforting and powerful at the same time. Familiar in an inexplicable way. I knew instinctively that I could trust it, and so I did. The light began to move around me, as if opening a path. Each step I took, if I was even walking, was like diving deeper into that ocean of peace. The blue formed into shapes, patterns that slowly swirled, like constellations in motion, forming a fabric of pure energy. It was beautiful, it was impossible, and yet it was real. I felt like I was part of something much bigger, something universal. Every curve of light around me seemed charged with knowledge, as if each particle told a story about the world, about me. I was being guided, not just physically but spiritually, to an understanding that transcended everything I had known. The walk, if I can still call it that, became a journey into myself. Then the light changed again. It stopped being just blue and began to glow with shades of gold, silver, and violet. I began to notice sharper details, shapes that moved like currents, as if the space had a life of its own. It was like being inside a visual symphony, where each note was a color, and each color a feeling. I felt love, compassion, understanding, all at once. And then the voice came back, even closer, more intimate. Zir, you are safe here, but there is something you need to see. The urgency in her tone made me pause. There was something I needed to understand. Ahead of me, the path opened up into a vast field bathed in warm, glowing light. And there, in the distance, I saw figures. Some were moving toward me. A wave of recognition shot through me. My eyes, or my consciousness, whatever it was, filled with an indescribable emotion. They were them, people I had lost years ago, people who still lived in my memory, who I thought I would never see again. They were there, smiling, whole, and in that moment, I understood. Life was not the end. It was just the beginning of something much bigger. I walked toward them with my heart racing and my mind filled with a whirlwind of emotions. It was as if each step was driven by years of longing, unanswered questions, and memories that time could never erase. The blue light around me seemed to pulse more intensely, as if it sensed the emotional charge of the moment. It vibrated in tune with my heart, creating a silent melody of expectation and hope that echoed throughout the ethereal space in which I found myself. As I approached, the figures became clearer, and then, in the middle of them, I saw him, my father, Arthur Reynolds. He was standing there looking at me with that serene, welcoming smile I knew so well. But something was different. He looked rejuvenated, as if time had turned back a few decades. His posture was straight, firm, full of vitality, but his expression held that same tenderness that had always made me feel safe when I was a child. "Father," I called, my voice soft, almost fragile, as if I was afraid of breaking the spell of the moment. The words seemed to expand in space, reverberating softly like echoes in a crystal cave. But he didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on me, warm, alive, but his mouth didn't move. I reached out, wanting to touch him, to feel the familiar texture of his large, firm hands. But an invisible barrier separated us. It was as if a thin veil of light kept me from crossing that line between seeing and feeling. I could see him clearly, down to the details of the wrinkles around his eyes, but I couldn't reach him. It was like a dream where you're running without moving. A slight frustration began to replace the peace that had previously enveloped me. It was as if I had arrived at a sacred place, and yet was not worthy to fully pass through its threshold. But then, as before, the voice returned, soft, enveloping, coming from all around me and at the same time, from within me. "Follow me." There was no demand in the voice, just a calm certainty, like the call of a destiny already mapped out. Without fully understanding, I continued on. There was something more, something that needed to be revealed. And so I continued walking, now enveloped by a new intensity of blue light, which began to shine more strongly, pulsing like a living heart, as if it knew what would come next. The path before me changed. The ground beneath my feet disappeared and gave way to a spiral of pure blue light that stretched upward, like a heavenly staircase toward infinity. Each step seemed to be made of solid, almost palpable mist. With each step, my body, or what was left of it, became lighter. I felt a growing liberation from the pains of the physical world, from human concerns, from the weight of responsibilities that had held me down for so long. The spiral wasn't just a path, it was a transition, from something limited and familiar to something vast, eternal, and impossible to describe with ordinary words. As I climbed, I noticed that the blue light wasn't just a glow, it had texture. It seemed to envelop my entire being, as if it could touch me, caress my very essence. It was like walking through an old but comforting memory, and the feeling was one of belonging, as if I were finally coming home. After what felt like an instant and an eternity, the spiral led me to a bridge, but not just any bridge. It was a picturesque, almost ethereal structure, with graceful arches that seemed carved from pure light. The bridge glowed with a softness that took my breath away. It was like a passage between worlds. The celestial light around it created a golden halo floating in the air, mingling with soft hues of pink, lilac, and blue. And then I saw them. On the other side of the bridge, there they were. My family, my mother, with her serene, loving face, just as I remembered it from my childhood days. My father, even more clearly visible now, standing firm, with a twinkle in his eyes. And Melon, my sister, with that soft, almost shy smile that always hid her inner strength. They all seemed radiant, enveloped in an aura of peace so profound it hurt, because it was so beautiful. My chest tightened. Emotion came like a wave, hot and uncontrollable. I walked toward them, my heart bursting with joy and inexplicable sadness. It was a bittersweet mix, seeing those I loved again, but feeling like I couldn't fully reach them. Every step I took brought back dormant memories. Birthdays, shared laughter in the kitchen, long conversations in the evening, and their absences. The pain of having lost them. "Father! Mother! Melan!" I called, my voice choked with emotion. But once again, there was no answer. They looked at me tenderly, as if they knew how hard this was for me. But their lips did not move. No sound crossed the bridge. Suddenly, my father stepped forward. He walked calmly across part of the bridge until he was closer to me. The light around him seemed to intensify, as if he were about to reveal something important to me. I noticed that his appearance had become even more vivid. His hair, which had been gray and thin, was now dark and thick. He was wearing his old leather jacket, the same one he used to wear when we went for motorcycle rides. It was impossible not to recognize it. "Zepper, you need to go back." His voice came straight to my mind, crystal clear. There was urgency in his tone, but also a fatherly care that made me pay attention immediately. He looked at my jacket, still damaged from the accident, stained with blood, with deep cuts on the sleeves, and added firmly, "That jacket belongs to your brother. You need to return it." I frowned in confusion. "Dad, I don't have a brother," I said, trying to understand what he meant. How could he? My parents were already gone. Melon was my only sibling. It didn't make sense. But he just smiled, a sad smile, full of compassion and wisdom. "Not yet, but you will. And that jacket is important. Trust me." Before I could ask any more questions, the glow around him began to intensify. His body slowly disintegrated into particles of blue light, like stardust blown away by the wind. His image disappeared, leaving behind more questions than answers. My mother and Melan were still on the other side of the bridge. She, always so loving, looked at me with concern, but also with pride. There was strength in her eyes, as if she were telling me without words that I was capable of enduring what was to come. Melan, serene, maintained the same sweet gaze, but in it there was a pang of sadness that pierced my soul, as if she knew that this encounter, however sacred it was, would have to come to an end. And in that golden silence, something inside me changed. They didn't say a word. No sentence was spoken. No sound crossed the bridge. But their presence spoke louder than any human language. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of love, full of support, full of an unshakable certainty that I was loved, accepted, guided. It was as if their souls were tuned to mine on a pure frequency, where words were no longer needed. However, no matter how much my heart begged me, something invisible kept me from crossing the bridge. My feet, which had previously walked lightly, now seemed rooted at that point of the crossing. The blue light around me intensified, pulsing as if it were holding me back, telling me, without saying, "Not yet." And then, like an echo piercing invisible layers of reality, my father's voice rang out again, clear, unmistakable, urgent. "Not yet, Zepper. There's something you need to see first." I turned my head, trying to understand. Everything inside me wanted to move forward, to run, to hug them. But the bridge began to fade. The shapes of my beloved familiar figures slowly faded, as if they were made of the very blue light that filled that plain. And with them, I felt the pain of a loss. Deep, familiar, but not desperate. I sensed somehow that this was part of something bigger, a purpose still hidden, but real. Before they were completely gone, my mother gently reached out and pointed. Her gesture was serene, without despair. It was an invitation, not a goodbye. I followed her gaze, and that was when I saw her. In the distance, something began to emerge from the void. A new light, even more intense than anything I had witnessed up until that point. It wasn't just white, it was opalescent, as if it contained all the colors of the spectrum in constant movement, blending shades I didn't even know existed. The light seemed alive, pulsating, and at the same time sacred. Not just beautiful, transcendental. An irresistible force pulled me toward it. It was as if that light was calling my name from within my soul. Despite the longing that was beginning to weigh on my chest, a new determination was born. I took one last look at the bridge where my family had stood, and with a deep breath that came not from my lungs, but from my essence, I began to walk toward the new light, not knowing what I would find, but ready to face it. As I approached the opalescent light, a feeling of absolute reverence took hold of me. It was as if I were walking straight into the heart of the universe, to the place where everything began and everything returned. The very atmosphere around me changed. There was no longer the calming blue vibration of the previous stage. Now it was as if I stood before something that saw me completely, past, present, and future, and accepted me nonetheless. With each step, I felt the weight of my being washed away. Old fears, buried hurts, failures that I had carried like burdens, they all began to dissolve. It was as if the light was cleansing my soul, preparing me for something. And then, when I finally reached that luminous core, I was involved by it. There was no more ground. There was no more direction. There was only light. And within it, visions began to form. Not just images like in a dream, but intense experiences, as if I were inside a memory that wasn't mine. And yet it was. It was like watching history unfold in real time, only in another dimension. The first scene came to mind abruptly. A political rally with a huge, excited crowd. The sound of shouts, applause, and collective fervor filled the room. On stage, unmistakably, was Donald Trump. Older, with features marked by time, but still charismatic and dominating the stage with his unshakable presence. His voice echoed over the crowd, intense and fervent. As I watched, I noticed something strange moving among the crowd. A shadow, a dim figure, moving forward with purpose. I couldn't see its face, but I could sense its intent, and it was dark. My senses sharpened. Time seemed to compress around its presence. The figure didn't blend in with the chaos of the crowd. It was moving through it, seeking a vantage point. Suddenly, the invisible view camera moved with me upward, and I saw it. The figure positioned at a vantage point, away from the stage, with a rifle pointed. The room froze. One shot. The sound was like a thunderclap that shattered time. I watched the projectile slice through the air in slow motion, cutting through the newly created silence like a knife through silk. The impact grazed Trump, passing by his ear. He clutched his face, staggering. Blood ran down, staining his white shirt as chaos exploded all around him. People screamed, running in every direction. Fear spread like wildfire. Security guards invaded the stage, protecting him. But the damage was already done. And in the midst of the suffocating tension of that scene, my father's voice returned. More serious, more urgent. "This is just the beginning, Zepper. You must warn the world. This attack will be the beginning of a global transformation. But it is not your time yet. Come back." His words hung in the air like bells ringing in the distance. But the vision did not stop. She unfolded, like an expanding cosmic flower. We protests around the world. Millions of people in different countries took to the streets, with posters, painted faces, voices united in cries for justice, for equality, for truth. It was as if an inner flame had been lit in every citizen of the planet. There was anger, hope, frustration, courage. Soon after, the scene changed again, this time to natural disasters of monumental scale. Hurricanes ravaging entire coasts, earthquakes leveling cities, tsunamis swallowing communities. The images were devastating, and human suffering could be felt in every gesture, every tear, every silence of destruction. And then politics reshaped itself before my eyes. Governments falling, new leaders emerging, not all of them good. I saw empty parliaments, silent revolutions, and some violent ones. The world as I knew it was in mutation. Going through something that felt like more than a crisis, it was a purification. One consciousness reset collective, like a forest devastated by fire, ready to be reborn, a cycle of destruction and rebirth. This is just the beginning, Zephyr. My father's voice reverberated like soft thunder within the light, powerful yet full of tenderness. You need to warn the world. This attack will be the beginning of a global transformation. But it is not your time yet. The words stuck in my mind like tattoos on my soul. Before I could respond, a new presence revealed itself before me. Not walking, not emerging from any specific point, but simply being there, as if it were always there, waiting for the right moment. It was a figure of light, but not just any light. It radiated something beyond brightness, an infinite peace, a silent wisdom, an absolute love. As soon as my spiritual eyes found that figure, I knew immediately who it was, even though no words had been spoken. It was Jesus, or at least what so many cultures recognize as the incarnation of the divine. His eyes did not judge me. They understood me. In them, I saw all my failures, my failings, my pains, and yet only compassion looked back at me. His presence silenced any doubt, dissolved any fear. There, I felt truly seen, not as a name, a body, an identity, but as an eternal being, part of something infinitely greater. He approached softly, without moving his feet, as if he were part of the very light that filled that space. And then he spoke. "You have a choice, Zephyr." His voice was like a serene chant, full of power and calm. "You can stay here, in eternal peace, free from pain, free from the weight of flesh, or you can go back, face what lies ahead. The future is challenging, but your mission is not over yet." I looked back at the empty space where my family had once been. The longing still burned in my chest, but now there was something more, an echo of the suffering my absence would cause. I could feel my sister's pain, the awkward silence that would follow among my friends, the void I would leave in the physical world. And in that moment, even surrounded by the purest peace, I knew with complete certainty I needed to go back. "I choose to go back," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "It's not over yet. There's still so much to do." Jesus nodded, as if he already knew my answer before I even formulated it. With a gentle gesture of his hand, as if sowing stars, he touched my essence. The blue light that had previously guided me now intertwined with a golden light, and in an indescribable instant, my soul was reunited with my body. The pain returned, and it came like a roar. It was like being crushed by a mountain of physical memories. Bones broke, muscles tightened, lungs burned, but something was different. Inside me, a new purpose beat louder than the pain. A sacred fire had been rekindled. I woke up. I was in intensive care, surrounded by beeping machines, stunned doctors, and nurses muttering among themselves. The air was thick, smelling of antiseptic and uncertainty, but I was alive. Today is July 14th, 2024, the day after Donald Trump's rally, and the attack that actually took place. When I heard the news on the radio that Trump had been slightly wounded by a gunshot during a rally in the United States, I knew that everything I had seen was real. That scene I had witnessed in the realm between worlds had come to fruition. A shiver ran down my spine. The pain of the accident was now a shadow in the face of the urgency that invaded me. The prophecy was being fulfilled, and more than ever I knew I had to warn the world. Something big, immense, and dangerous was just beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and discoveries. Between bandages, morphine, and routine checkups, the hospital became a capsule between the past and the future. My friends and family came to visit me, relieved that I had survived, but I could barely explain what had happened. The physical pain still reminded me of the trauma, but what really kept me awake at night were the vivid memories of that spiritual journey, of my father's voice, of Jesus' presence, of visions of the future. That morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the blinds of the ICU, my sister walked in. Paddle. She had always been my support, my most faithful friend, and at that moment, Her presence was the most effective medicine. Her eyes were red from crying so much, but there was something in her gaze that reminded me of the blue light. Strength, tenderness, and truth. "Zeph," she said, squeezing my hand gently. "When they called me about the accident, my world fell apart. I thought I wouldn't see you again. Your hug broke me inside." "There," I cried, not from pain, but from gratitude. "Mel," I took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you, and it's going to sound crazy." She looked at me like she always did, ready to face anything by my side. I began to speak. I told him everything, from the rain on the Brooklyn Bridge to the spiral of light, the reunion with our parents, the vision of the attack, and the moment I looked into the eyes of Jesus and chose to return. Melon didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, she was still holding my hand. There were tears on her face, but not from fear. So let's find out what it all means, together. Thus began our journey. When I was finally discharged, we left the hospital with a list of questions that seemed larger than life itself. We began investigating everything involving near-death experiences, prophetic visions, spiritual phenomena, anything that might help us understand what I had seen. We spent days immersed in old books, online archives, esoteric documentaries. Nothing seemed enough, until we found the name of Dr. James Crawford. A renowned expert on altered states of consciousness and near-death experiences, Crawford was known for his pioneering work with patients who reported encounters with entities or visions of catastrophic futures. We decided to get in touch. He welcomed us into his private clinic, in a discreet and welcoming environment. Tall, thin, with well-cut gray hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to read thoughts. Dr. Crawford listened to us in absolute silence as I recounted, for the third time, my entire experience, with every detail carefully preserved. He wrote in a leather notebook, like a monk copying sacred scriptures. When I finished, he carefully closed the notebook, looked into my eyes and said, "Zeppa, what you experienced is not just a vision, it is a calling. Zia, your story is fascinating," Dr. Crawford said, his eyes fixed on me with an intense but warm gaze, as if trying to read my soul through the words I had just shared. The silence that followed my speech was heavy, thick as the fog of a sacred revelation. Melon squeezed my hand tightly, the warmth of her fingers keeping me rooted in the present, while my mind still hovered between the vivid memory of the blue light and the silent terror of the future vision. Dr. Crawford intertwined his fingers and leaned forward slightly. Near-death experiences are more common than we realize, but the level of clarity, prophecy, and spiritual symbolism that you experienced is extremely rare. Honestly, Zir, we may be looking at something that transcends even science itself. Dr. Crawford's office was on a high floor of an unassuming building in the heart of Manhattan. Contrary to what one might expect from a clinical office, the space was warm and inviting, with soft blues, antique books lined on dark wood shelves, and paintings that blended scientific imagery with spiritual icons. It was a space that fused the mystical with the empirical, a true representation of the journey we were embarking on. "I would like to try regressive hypnosis," he said calmly. "Your accounts are clear, but I believe your mind holds more than what you consciously remember. And if we can access those deeper memories, we may be able to understand not only what happened, but why." The room where we performed the process was soft and welcoming. Light scents of lavender wafted through the air, and soothing instrumental music filled the silence with an almost ethereal serenity. I sat in a reclining chair, Melon by my side the entire time holding my hand. Dr. Crawford began the process with a calm, steady voice, guiding my breathing, my emotions, my mind, slowly delving into the depths of my subconscious. The regression pulled me back, without resistance. It was as if the blue light was waiting for me on the other side. The bridge, my father, the figure of Jesus, the screams of the crowd, the crack of the gunshot. It all came back, but now with dizzying clarity. I could see the faces in the crowd, ordinary people, with fear and hope in their eyes. I could see the shooter clearly, his determination, his coldness. And then, I went further. Hypnosis opened doors I didn't even know existed. Protests took place in the streets, masses of people clamoring for justice. I saw earthquakes destroying entire cities, oceans flooding the land, leaders being overthrown, and governments collapsing. It was a world in transition, a planet in pain, but not only that. There was also rebirth, communities coming together, people awakening to something greater. When I came to, I was drenched in sweat, breathing heavily. The room seemed to spin slowly, as if time had not yet returned to normal. "Zir, what did you see?" Dr. Crawford asked, his expression a mixture of fascination and concern. Melon stood pale but firm beside me, her eyes asking the same question. "I saw more than the attack," I said, still processing the images that pulsed through my mind. "I saw what came after. Protests, natural disasters, the collapse of political systems, and also rebirth. It was as if the world were being destroyed so that it could be rebuilt." Dr. Crawford was silent for a moment, then said solemnly, "You have been chosen, Zir, not just to see, but to warn and prepare." That conversation changed everything. From that moment on, we decided that we could no longer remain inactive. We created a group, a movement, the Guardians of Light. At first, there were just 3 of us, Milan, Dr. Crawford, and me. But the message was too powerful to keep to ourselves. We began reaching out to influential people, teachers, spiritual leaders, activists, doctors, ex-military personnel, anyone willing to listen and make a difference. We didn't ask for blind faith, but for openness, and slowly, they began to hear us. The first meetings took place in discreet rooms, community libraries, wellness centers. We talked about visions, what could be done, how to prepare ourselves, emotionally, spiritually, logistically, collective meditations, resilience strategies, philosophical discussions about humanity's role in this new cycle. July 14th, 2024. One day after the attack, the news confirming what I had seen was still echoing in the headlines and on the news. Trump had survived, yes, but that assassination attempt was not the climax. It was the beginning. My story is no longer just mine. It was now a universal call. During my recovery, between physical therapy and doctor's appointments, the days were long and exhausting. The pain followed me like a shadow, but it never defeated me. Because there was a purpose, there was a mission, and above all, there was Melon. She never left my side for a moment. She made me tea when I woke up screaming in pain. She read me passages from spiritual books while applying ointments to my scars. She wrote down everything I dreamed or remembered. She was more than a sister. She was my guardian. "Zay," she said, looking me in the eyes with a firmness that only those who know true love can carry. "No matter how big or scary this seems, you are not alone. We are in this together, and we will see it through." And it was there, between pillows and hopes, that we began to plan the first big meeting of the Guardians of Light. A call, a summons. What about you? Are you ready for what comes next? Melanie and Dr. Crawford were tireless. For days, they immersed themselves in spreadsheets, contacts, and phone calls, arranging every detail of our first meeting. We had decided to hold it at a small community library in Queens, a low-key place with a welcoming aura. The tall shelves, filled with forgotten books, seemed to hold ancient wisdom. It was modest, but perfect. This wasn't about appearances. It was about truth. That morning, I woke up early, my heart beating in a strange rhythm, a mix of anxiety, purpose, and fear of the unknown. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at me. There were still marks from the accident on my face and body, but it was in my eyes that the greatest change was evident. I now carried the weight of a mission. As we walked toward the library, Melanie drove in silence, her hand resting firmly on my shoulder. Dr. Crawford met us at the entrance, wearing a simple sweater but with the same piercing gaze as always. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure what the answer was. Little by little, people began to arrive. Men and women of different ages and backgrounds, some curious, others clearly skeptical, but all drawn by something invisible, perhaps an inner calling, perhaps the same premonition that had guided me since the accident. As the auditorium began to fill, my nervousness grew. With each seat I filled, I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. Would they believe me? Would I be able to touch their hearts? The room fell silent. I stood up and walked to the small makeshift lectern. I swallowed hard. Melanie and Dr. Crawford stood to my left, watching me with eyes that already knew I was capable. I took a deep breath and began. Good evening, everyone. My name is Zephyr Reynolds, and today I'm going to share something that completely changed my life. My voice shook slightly at first, but as I continued, I felt like the words weren't coming from me. They were coming from something much bigger. I told them about the motorcycle accident, about the rain that spring night in New York, about the impact, the darkness, and the blue light that enveloped me. I shared about meeting my dead father, about the figure of Jesus who offered me a choice, and about seeing the attack. With each sentence, the room seemed to sink deeper into the experience with me. Some faces were in tears, others were serious, taking it all in with wide eyes. "I'm not here to convince anyone," I said firmly in the end. "I am here to warn, to gather, to prepare." What I saw was not a dream. It was a calling. Dr. Crawford then took the microphone. His presence was quiet but powerful. He spoke with wisdom and clarity. "We are here to establish something important. The Guardians of Light, a network of support, awareness, and preparation. We are not a sect, nor a cult. We are a community. Our purpose is simple: to awaken, to unite, to prepare." Then Melanie took the stage with a determined gleam in her eyes. She presented the strategies we had outlined, from community strengthening initiatives, to emotional support networks, to natural and social emergency response plans. She spoke from the heart, and her heart was big enough to touch everyone in the room. At the end of the meeting, something magical happened. People began to spontaneously stand up and share their own experiences, premonitory dreams, unexplained intuitions, spiritual encounters. We were no longer alone. It became a sacred space of connection and vulnerability. For the first time, I felt like everything made sense. We left that library with much more than we expected. We gained allies. We gained direction. In the following days, we worked like never before. We spent the early morning hours poring over notes, maps, and theories. We established an intense routine. I divided my time between physical recovery and meetings with our core group, while Dr. Crawford organized contacts with other scholars and researchers around the world. Melanie led the organization of the events with admirable discipline. We began holding meetings in other neighborhoods around the city, Harlem, Brooklyn, even Jersey. And with each new meeting, more people showed up. The movement grew, organic and passionate. Psychologists began to seek us out, interested in our accounts of near-death experiences. Community leaders joined us, offering their spaces. Even some local politicians showed interest, seeing our cause as a legitimate way to restore hope in their communities. Melanie and I barely slept, but there was joy. Sometimes she would look at me tiredly, her eyes half closed from sleep, and say with a crooked smile, "You've seen the future. Now we're helping to shape it." And that's exactly what we were doing. Little by little, step by step, we were planting seeds of consciousness. Today is July 14th, 2024, exactly one day after the attack that confirmed everything I saw. The news says Trump survived, but the world is beginning to realize that this was only the beginning. The Guardians of Light are no longer just an idea, they are a movement. And my journey, once solitary, now echoes in hundreds of awakened voices. I'm Zephyr Reynolds, a man who died for a moment, to return with a mission. Now, with faith, courage, and truth, we work so that the world is ready for what is coming. And this is just the first page of the story that is yet to be written. Today, looking back, I see not an accident, but a rebirth. That rainy night in New York marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. I died on that bridge, but I was reborn in the blue light, guided by my Father, blessed by a divine presence, and entrusted with a mission greater than any dream or plan I had ever made. The man who stepped off that broken road was no longer the same man who had ridden that motorcycle hours earlier, and he never will be. Throughout this journey, I discovered that true transformation does not happen with great miracles in the eyes of the world, but with small awakenings in hearts. With each person who hears this story and feels something stir within them, a discomfort, a hope, a memory of something greater, the mission is accomplished a little more. The Guardians of Light are not heroes. We are just ordinary people who decided not to ignore the call, who understood that the future can be written with awareness, unity, and courage, that even when everything seems to be falling apart, there is still light, and it shines brightest in the shadows. I don't know exactly what will come. My visions have shown a world in turmoil, yes, but they have also shown faces, many faces, awakening to the truth. And if chaos is the soil in which we plant a new tomorrow, then I will accept that mission with an open heart. What I saw was not just a warning, it was a promise. There is hope. And as long as I breathe, as long as there is someone willing to listen, to change, to love with more intention, I will be here. Because I was called, because I came back, and because now I understand. Light is not a place. Light is whoever chooses to carry it. I'm Zephyr Reynolds, and this is the story that changed my life. So that perhaps it will change yours too.